The Gauteng Township Economic Development Bill was actually tabled today by Gauteng MEC for Economic Development, Pakstau, and it has received the thumbs up from members of the Provincial Legislature. The bill aims to provide a legal mechanism for the promotion and development of the township economy. In its wide implementation, the bill aims to unleash a Township Partnership Fund for township-based businesses, support the taxi rank economy and backyard real estate development. Here to unpack this for us further, I'm joined by the MEC for Economic Development, Pakstau. You can be a part of the conversation tonight by sending us your WhatsApp messages to 072-110-5584 or tweet us with your questions for the MEC at Newzroom 405. MEC, good evening, and thank you so much for your time and joining us tonight on In Focus. If we look at the remodeled Growing Gauteng Together Plan 2030, ambitious plan, many are saying. It's a plan that seeks to double the economy of the province in the next 11 years. Not only that, you plan to reduce at least by 2/3 the unemployment rate in the country. But part of what this plan seeks to do is to unlock at least 200 township entrepreneurs to benefit from the 4 billion per annum spent in buying goods and services that government actually uses. How does that connect with the bill that was tabled today at the legislature?
Thank you very much, Thabo, and good evening. As you have indicated, the provincial government has adopted the Growing Gauteng Together 2030 strategy, and in there identified a number of interventions to help accelerate the Growing Gauteng Together 2030 strategy. First amongst these would be what the Premier has titled a rethinking of the economic geography of the province of Gauteng through our special economic zones, which are currently underway in terms of implementation, but also through the township economic development initiatives. And today was an important milestone in ensuring that the legislature is able to put a legislative framework and instruments that would help accelerate economic development in the townships of Gauteng and address issues of spatial redress, considering that these were designed as dormitories for labor, so ensure that we're able to redesign these into functional urban systems that function on the basis of economic, social, and human settlement integration in Gauteng. And for us, we're very excited that the legislature unanimously adopted the bill and agreed that we're on the right course in terms of addressing the economic challenges of Gauteng through the interventions in the township, amongst others.
Yeah. So in simplest terms, what are we trying to achieve with this bill? We're trying to get at least people working within the township themselves so that they don't need to travel long distances just to be able to get employment. I gather that's one of the things that you would want to do. But not only that, you would want to create within the township the ability for private sector, for government in particular, to be able to come and spend money and support those businesses in the township.
Those are certainly some of the objectives. It is important that as we seek to ensure broad-based black economic empowerment, that this finds expression in terms of spatial disparities that we've inherited and creating a different morphology, if you like, for our urban systems and historically black townships, so that these are designed and function in an integrated way where people can access job opportunities in close proximity to where they are, but also they are able to actively participate in creating the jobs themselves through the township enterprise zones that have been adopted in this bill as a mechanism of implementing economic development in the townships. We would be able to designate specific areas in our townships for what we call benefit stacking. And that is the concentration of different benefits from different spheres of government into enterprises that exist in those areas. This would include possible tax incentives that we actively lobbying national government around. This would include enterprise and supplier development, which is an obligation that the state has and the private sector to ensure that suppliers, particularly in historically disadvantaged areas and people that come from a historically disadvantaged environment, receive the necessary supplier development and enterprise development support. So we're setting aside the resources to ensure that these suppliers into both our value chains, but also in the private sector, receive direct support from government. We also, as you indicated earlier, creating a financing mechanism for enterprises in the township. We've agreed on a partnership fund with the IDC and are currently adjudicating partners in implementing these financing mechanisms for different sectors for enterprises in the townships. And in terms of the bill itself, the Act would literally direct that the provincial government should establish a financing mechanism. But we, in anticipation of the Act, started doing the work. We've signed off with the ITC. We're adjudicating, and we should be able to accommodate people that come and seek financing for their enterprises. And most important is that we also see ourselves as a direct market for township-based enterprises. And the bill directs that we should dedicate 40% of our procurement spend, both in terms of goods and services, which are the products that we procure for use in government. And these range from products used in hospitals, in our fleet suppliers, to a whole range of other products that we use as provincial government, that we should be able to procure these from manufacturers in townships and enable participation in value chains by township-based enterprises at different levels of where enterprise development can take place, so that we can facilitate that when we talk about commercial and industrial development in the township, it enables people in the township to directly manufacture goods and products for use by us, but also by private sector, and also targeting the export market.
Yeah. So as someone who is possibly an entrepreneur within the township space, what are the levers that I can pull on coming from this bill immediately that empower me?
The first is that we would have dedicated or designated rather what we call township enterprise zones and precincts, where you would know that if I invest in this area, there are specific programs of support that would come directly from government. Amongst these would include, as I said, direct supply development. They would include the necessary infrastructure and financing mechanism for equipment and other necessary capitalization of your enterprise directly in these areas. It also enables you to have direct access to market through the provincial government and other entities that we're partnering with. And it's important to emphasize that we have actively been engaging the private sector and saying to them, we can't be in a situation where people in historically black townships find that there are malls and retail facilities from which they procure, but all the goods come in and the cash goes out without them actively being participants in the ecosystem of the economy of those retail facilities. And the private sector has said, we are quite keen to develop a mechanism directly with you to ensure that people participate at different levels. You know, the easiest example to make, Tabo, would be that many people are involved in logistics services in the townships. People own bakkies, they own combis and different facilities where they move goods and services from one point to the other in an informal way. And we're saying those people can be integrated into a logistics value chain for provincial government, but also for the private sector. We're now showing a keen interest, particularly after July last year, where there was direct evidence that, in fact, the people do not identify with these centers, but also an acknowledgement that this could contribute as part of an ecosystem of economic development in our townships.
So using that very same example, are you saying you will build a township enterprise zone, or is there such a thing that already exists where it will be a logistics hub, for a township like Soweto, for example, where all those who own a bakkie or maybe own a truck that is sitting doing nothing can come and apply and be part of that economic zone and be able to then receive these benefits?
That certainly would constitute part of what we would be implementing in terms of the Township Economic Development Act. As indicated, it was passed by the legislature today. It has to go through the necessary processes for the Premier's final sign-off for it to be an act. And in terms of the mechanisms created there, we should be able to designate spaces for logistics, and this would include storage facilities, it would include wholesale facilities, It would include transportation amenities that people would require. So people can participate at different value chains, even at that most basic level, but also at the level of actual manufacturing and agro-processing of goods in the townships. The reality is, if you think about it, should it always be that people that are located in the townships should have bread wheeled into the townships, when in fact they have the capability and capacity to bake their own bread, sell their own bread into the township, but also into government and other entities that would begin to participate in this endeavor.
We continue next with the MEC for Economic Development in Gauteng. What will it take then to make this bill not just a piece of paper but a reality and implementable on the ground? You can, of course, also weigh in on the conversation tonight on Twitter at Newzroom405 or send us a WhatsApp message with your comments on 072-110-5584. In Focus continues shortly. That's tonight here on In Focus with the MEC for Economic Development, Environment and Agriculture in the Gauteng province, Pakstau. And we are talking township economic development. The bill is now before legislature to be put forward to the Premier to be signed in as an act of law, which means that what comes out of there should now certainly be law as far as the Gauteng province is concerned. Now, MEC, part of what needs to be achieved by 2030 is 50 black industrialists, 50 emerging black farmers, 20 black agro-processors, just to name a few, 500 cooperatives to be playing part in the economy. Are those numbers or those targets programmed into this modeling of the bill and how it's going to work?
In fact, in many ways, those are minimum targets, because I think the bill gives us an opportunity to significantly increase the number of black industrialists that would participate at different levels of the township economy. If you think about it, in line with our special economic zones, we've got a significant proportion of black industrialists that are already participating. And with a dedicated and focused interventions in the townships, we should be able to increase exponentially the number of township-based industrialists and enterprises that can participate in the Gauteng economy.
Yeah. Land use questions then, when we're talking emerging farmers, the space in which they are going to be working, what does the bill imagine as the land that these farmers are going to be using? I mean, Gauteng, generally, there's not a lot of land for agriculture, one would say, but the Eguruleni area, for example, we're looking at a possibility of expropriation as something that they would explore.
We will be releasing a few thousand hectares in this year and next year as the province of Gauteng towards agriculturalists that want to participate in the economy of Gauteng, and providing direct support to them to ensure that they are able to build their agricultural plantations and farms, but also able to actively participate in the Gauteng economy. We have approved as the provincial government the establishment of a black suppliers database that would also supply directly into the provincial government. We've agreed amongst others with the South African National Defence Force as a direct procurer of goods and services that would procure directly from the farmers that we have identified. And we've agreed with the Department of Agriculture that we should increase this significantly to ensure that literally all black farmers in the province of Gauteng should feel and believe that, in fact, the programs that we've put in place reach them and in a practical way create opportunities for them. But there are a few things that we need to ensure as we address particularly the agricultural sector, which are issues that relate to access to market. There is a program to create a market in the West Rand. We're also creating a horticultural hub, an egg aggregation facility, and other facilities where we can bring their produce and goods into pack houses, into aggregation facilities, so that they have a direct mechanism through which they are not inhibited to access market, but they have their own government-facilitated mechanism that would enable them to access us as a market, to access the private sector, and indeed to access other agencies, and as I said, including the South African National Defence Force.
Yeah.
But that's a separate program from the township economy, and indeed I would think that on another day we might even want to have an extensive discussion on our interventions in the agricultural sector, also in agro-processing and related issues.
Now, let's look then at how this can be made reality. You know, we tend to have plans. We've got the NDP, for example. We've got now the reconstruction and recovery plan. All these are plans that are put on paper, and they should work. And as you mentioned them now, they sound really good on paper as plans. What is required? What's the discipline that is required so that these plans become a reality come 2030? What is the right skills that we need to be brought into these plans so that they become a reality, and the investment that we now need to make as a province, be it in knowledge or in strategic resources that are required to make this plan a reality?
The discipline of implementation, particularly in the public sector, is driven by the targets that you set in the business plans, or what are called annual performance plans of different agencies and departments in government. And we have ensured that these targets are clearly articulated in the annual performance plans of our departments. We have also ensured that we build the appropriate partnerships. We have partnered, for example, with the Agricultural Development Agency. We have partnered with the Public-Private Growth Initiative as direct private sector partners with whom we are driving the process of implementation. We have, through them and with them, reached out to the private sector to ensure that they are on board and are able to make their own contribution to the processes of implementation. As indicated earlier, we've had a number of roundtables, at which roundtables we've agreed on a set of actionables between us and the private sector about how to accelerate the implementation of our programs. And lastly, it is about ensuring that we utilize the provisions of the bill to achieve what it sets out to achieve. So the bill says, amongst others, that the MEC shall designate township enterprise zones. So we should ensure that these township enterprise zones are designated so that investment takes place there. The bill says, amongst others, we should create financing mechanisms for township-based enterprises. As indicated, we have finalized the mechanism through which township-based enterprises would be supported financially. We have signed on the dotted line with the ITC. We're currently adjudicating jointly with the ITC private sector partners that are bringing in their own money and their own platforms as complementary interventions to what we're already putting on the table. And we are taking a first loss and higher risk position in these investments so that they can be able to find innovative ways of financing these enterprises. So in many ways, it's a combination of platforms and interventions that you need to put in place to ensure that implementation takes place and that you're able to attain the objectives that have been set out in the bill.
Yeah. Talk to me about what you mean by that. What is that first loss approach that you're taking? Because I suppose you've learned from the enterprise relief scheme that we had a very low uptake during the time of COVID-19, and many small businesses says, look, we couldn't access this thing. Basically, the process and the criteria of accessing this thing was too cumbersome, and it actually left us out. So when you're talking of a first loss approach, what exactly does that entail?
So, for example, we're saying to our partners, it should be possible to make decisions around financing a business without seeking collateral, because you believe in the business that's been presented. But private sector enterprises would require collateral because they have to take into account the possible risks that come there. But we are saying to them, on the basis of our investments, you can waiver some of those provisions that necessarily you would make in the private sector. We're also saying that there could be lower interest rates, in certain instances possible grants for certain facilities that we think we should be able to invest in, and should therefore be able to jointly invest with the private sector, with us taking a position of providing the grant and they providing the loan facility. Of course, we tried this earlier in this financial year, as I should say, towards the end of the year as part of the relief grant, particularly post the July unrest, where we jointly agreed with the ITC that we will create a fund that 50% of it would be a grant and another 50% of it would be a loan. And the uptake was fairly low because many of the enterprises that were impacted were those that already had insurance. And we said, no, but those that have insurance have access to their own insurance. They also have access to SASRIA. Let's look at those most vulnerable. And we've learned important lessons from that in terms of how we could design possible structures. The actual structures that we're designing are the subject of current adjudication taking place between ourselves and the ITC, and therefore through the partners that we'll be appointing, we'll indicate the detail of the different facilities. So there will be facilities for those who want to be in retail, for those who want to be in property, for those who want to be in the auto sector. So we're looking at different sort of financing mechanisms with different partners that specialize in those different industries so that they are able to bring their expertise and capabilities to bear.
Yeah. And how then does this work with the Municipal Act and the various municipalities? I mean, we know now, for example, in Gauteng, there are certain municipalities that do not fall within the control of the ANC. Do you have buy-in from those municipalities to support the initiatives of this plan?
Firstly, we have consulted with all municipalities pre and post the elections. We had a session earlier this year where it invited all the municipalities to participate, and we presented the Township Economic Development Bill, its implications to local government, and we're seeing this as a partnership in the process of implementation. Secondly, the bill makes provision, the bill makes provision directly for bylaws that should be developed by municipalities as complementary bylaws to the implementation of this bill. So through the provision of the bylaws, municipalities would be obligated to ensure that they have mechanisms that support the implementation of this bill. We have drafted and designed a model standard bylaw. We've circulated it to SALGA and to all the municipalities and said you can take and adapt or adopt approach to the bill. So you can adapt to your own bylaws and make the necessary amendments, but where you don't have to adapt and you need to draft a new bylaw, we already have a draft model standard bylaw that you can use directly for purposes of consultation and adoption in your municipality. The Act, of course, as an act of the legislature, is binding to all the municipalities in our province, but we are encouraged by the level of cooperation that we are receiving from the municipalities in our province.
Yeah. And while we're there on the issue of bylaws, I mean, the licensing, for example, of various businesses. So you've got contractors, you've got panel beaters, you've got mechanics and all sorts of things within the township economy. Most of them operating kind of informally at this particular point, not necessarily having gone through all the required licensing. How are you approaching that aspect of things through the bill?
The bill has a particular section that's looking at licensing. It acknowledges that 90% or more of township-based enterprises are not licensed, and we need to create a lower rung of compliance and regulation in the townships so that we can bring those people into the fold of a set of enterprises that can gain direct support and be licensed in our province. So we have created through the bill a mechanism of additional licensing processes that can be undertaken at the lowest level of economic activity in our province.
MEC, we appreciate your time, and yeah, indeed, we'll have you back on. Talk to us broadly about what you're doing for the agricultural sector, but also touch on the other aspects of the Growing Gauteng Together Plan 2030. We're out of time for tonight, but I appreciate you, and thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated.